guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm doing one more Q&A before we get back to our regularly scheduled videos. I've been spending the last couple of weeks with my family and we got hit with a winter snowstorm and got snowed in, so our visit actually got extended, which, I mean, I wasn't sad about it. Today we're going to be answering a couple of questions about Christian Universalism and various Bible passages. We've got a question about astrology and witchcraft, and then we have a more metaphysical question on topics concerning life after death. So let's get started. 1 million views says, I want to believe in universalism, but what about John 3:16? What does perish mean? Annihilationists believe that it means to die or to be destroyed or to cease to exist. The word perish is the Greek word Apollumi, and it means in the Greek to be lost, ruined, or destroyed. So yes, it does have the connotation of being completely and utterly destroyed so that there's no coming back from it. And so I understand where the annihilationists are coming from. However, I disagree with them in the sense that I don't think it is referencing the destruction of our spirits, the destruction of us as a spiritual being. In context, the word is usually used to denote physical destruction. There is only one passage that I can think of in the New Testament where it explicitly says that God is able to destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. So that's the only time I can think of where Apollumi is used in reference to destruction of a soul. But we have to keep in mind that the word soul in Jewish thought did not mean eternal spirit. It meant the personality and life of the person on earth. And I've actually gone into more depth on this passage in another video, which I will link below. So aside from that passage, which is actually talking again about earthly life, not about eternal spirits, there is no direct reference to the destruction of eternal spirits connected with this word that's translated perish. I will link below a comprehensive list of all the places in the New Testament where this word is used. But just briefly, let's look at a few passages so we can get an idea of how it's normally translated. Matthew 2:13. Herod is going to search for the child to kill him, and that's that word, Apollumi. Matthew 8:25. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown or perish. Matthew 26:52. All who draw the sword will die or perish by the sword. Mark 11:18. The chief priests and the teachers of the law saw this and began looking for a way to kill him. That's the word there, kill. This word is also used in the parable of the lost coin, where it says that the coins were lost. That's that word Apollumi, and it means physically lost. She couldn't find them. Or there's another passage where Jesus talks about food spoiling, and that word translated spoil is Apollumi. So this is how it's usually used in reference to physical destruction or spoiling or being lost. I actually did a video on this topic before, and then I ended up accidentally deleting the raw files, so I lost it. But I went through all the instances where Jesus uses this exact translation of the word Apollumi that's used in John 3:16. It's the conditional future tense. If this happens, then they may, might, could, should, would perish. So that's just a little bit of grammar for you there. But in most of the instances where Jesus uses this specific form of the verb, it is in direct reference to the destruction of Jerusalem. And so that's why I believe in John 3:16, that's probably what he's talking about. But there's no indication here that he's talking about either eternal conscious torment or annihilationism. Honestly, we read that into the text because it's not there. It says to perish. That's it. There's no indication in the Bible at all, in my opinion, of annihilation of spirits. First of all, it's just not there. But secondly, metaphysically, as far as my understanding goes, that's not even possible. Because for an eternal spirit that proceeded from God to be annihilated, then part of God would have to be annihilated, and that's not possible. But that is a whole other topic, and I want to move on to the next question. I also received a question. I didn't write the name of the person who asked me this question. I believe it was you, Angel. about Jeremiah 23:40, where it says, I will bring on you everlasting disgrace, everlasting shame that will not be forgotten. How do we explain this in light of universalism? Well, the same way that we would explain any Old Testament passage that uses the word everlasting shame, everlasting contempt, everlasting destruction. It is talking about physical, earthly destruction. And there's really no question about this when it comes to the Old Testament, because during that time period, they had not developed any ideas about afterlife rewards or punishments that we have today. In ancient Jewish thought, people went to Sheol in the afterlife. Whether you were righteous or wicked, you went to the same place. So the righteous were blessed by God in this life, and the wicked were punished by God in this life. Due to physical annihilation, destruction would come upon them in this life, and that was seen as the judgment of God for their sins. But after death, everybody went to the same place, and it was like an eternal slumber. There wasn't really much thought put into the afterlife until the time of the Second Temple period, with the influence of the Persians and Zoroastrianism. The Jews began to adopt more complicated afterlife theories. But Jeremiah was written before and up to the destruction of the temple. So most likely during that time period, they didn't have a theology of the afterlife at all. So this reference to everlasting shame would have meant literally what it says. The destruction of Israel was going to be so complete that the nations of the world would look at it and see what had happened, and everybody would know, and the memory of that destruction would live on. So it would be everlasting shame, not everlasting torment. It just means people are going to know and remember what happened to you. Next question, and switching gears a little bit here, Josephine Bailey says, what do you think about things like astrology and witchcraft? I have always been so drawn to them, but have felt such a large amount of guilt about it because I grew up in the church. I love Jesus, but I love all things spiritual. First of all, Josephine, there's no reason to feel guilty. When we feel guilt, it tends to draw us to the things that are forbidden, right? So the first thing I would recommend is letting go of the guilt, letting go of any shame that's been connected to your tendencies or what you're drawn to, and just give that to God, surrender it, and ask Him to guide you into a form of spirituality that would be healthy for you. I'll get into a little bit more detail on both astrology and witchcraft here in a moment, but I just want to say my general recommendation across the board with anything to do with any religious or spiritual path is to stay in the light, stay with Jesus because He is the Savior of the world, stay on the path of love and service to others and spiritual growth. So there's two basic spiritual paths. These two paths can be found divided across religious and spiritual barriers, and I'm going to use the language of the Law of One here because I think it's really simple and easy to understand, but different religions will use different words to talk about this. So we have the service to others path, which is the true spiritual path demonstrated by Jesus Christ, recognizing that we are all one, that we are one with each other and with God, and demonstrating and expressing that through love. Doing the inner spiritual work on ourselves to grow into that oneness and to awaken into that oneness, and by serving others and helping them along their paths into awakening. The second spiritual path that people will follow is called the service to self path. And this is the path of deception. This is the path that says we are separate from God, we are separate from each other. I am here to serve the self. This path leads to arrogance, judgment, guilt, pride, shame, violence, manipulation, control, greed, power, materialism. I could go on and on and on. But people can still develop spiritual abilities. You can use the law of attraction. You can develop psychic or healing abilities. Things that would be considered spiritual can be developed on both paths. But the service to self path, or what the apostles would call walking in the flesh, or what Jesus would have called the path that leads to perishing, is the path of destruction. You will experience the destruction of the choices that you are making until you ultimately figure out none of this can satisfy me. The only thing that can satisfy me is God. So this is something to keep in mind when we're talking about these various forms of spirituality. I'm not one to say that you have to be a Christian to know God. I've pretty much made that clear, but I think if we're getting off into some of these other more spiritualist paths, there's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of ways that it's easy to be deceived, and you have to be really careful. So as long as you are following the way of light, the way of service, the way of Christ, the way that's challenging and constantly pushing you to grow spiritually, to be purified within, then you're on the right track. If there's anything in the teachings that you are following that is encouraging towards aggrandizing of self, or worship of self, or control and manipulation of others, any hint of there being a special group that's blessed by God or that has more abilities, none of that is the way of Christ. That is all service to self, and you want to avoid that. Okay, so let's talk about astrology. I don't really recommend getting involved in most of the astrology that's out there. I think most of it is fake. I do believe that there is a real astrology, and basically that would be the science of studying the planets and stars and how their electromagnetic frequencies affect life on Earth. The moon influences everything from the tides to people's mental and emotional states. I know this firsthand. I used to work at an assisted living center, and when it was a full moon, things were crazy. So the planetary bodies do have an influence on us here, and the study of that is what I would call true astrology. The problem is, because there's such a superstition about it, it's not taken seriously as a science, and so there's a lot of frauds out there. Another thing to keep in mind with astrology is that just like with prophecy, nothing is set in stone. We are living in a thought-reactive universe. Everything is consciousness. We are consciousness. For sake of argument, say somebody was to get an astrology reading, and it's based on the most likely outcomes of the electromagnetic frequencies of the heavenly bodies that are interacting with Earth, and then somebody goes and bases their life off of those predictions. And I think this happens a lot, that people end up experiencing self-fulfilling prophecies because they take these astrological predictions, they assume this is true and this is going to happen to me, and then their subconscious mind with their intention starts to create the conditions to bring this prediction into reality. My personal feeling on it is that I just stay away from all of it, just because I am really big on becoming as conscious of a creator in my world as possible, and I don't want anything unnecessary influencing my ideas or my mindset on what has to happen in the future. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I might recommend getting and reading Dr. Joe Dispenza's books, particularly Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself and Becoming Supernatural, and doing his meditations, learning to develop your own will and intention, and becoming really good at knowing how to go into your own subconscious mind and change beliefs that you don't want to be there, so that you're less likely to be influenced. Witchcraft, honestly, I haven't studied in great depth. I'm going to assume that you probably mean the more benign forms of witchcraft rather than the really obviously dark and satanic forms. My opinion is that these forms of witchcraft are basically just the law of attraction taken out of any religious context. It's using the power of intention, that part of you that is metaphysical or spiritual or consciousness, to have an effect on the material world, which, as we see also with the New Age movement, has a tendency to devolve very quickly into the service to self path, like we were talking about earlier, because when you discover this type of power outside of the context of a true spiritual path, which is love and service to others and knowing God, people have a tendency to be drawn very quickly into materialism and worship of self and desire for power. I think witchcraft is best avoided for obvious reasons, because a lot of it is very dark. But I think that you can get anything that you might be looking for in the more benign or modern forms of witchcraft in other more healthy, safe, balanced spiritual paths. Most fundamentalist religions have a mystical counterpart. Again, I highly recommend Dr. Joe Dispenza and his books because he takes these concepts like law of attraction, which he doesn't use that word because it's really New Age terminology, but he talks about conscious ability to influence this material world, and he takes it, he describes it very scientifically, and he puts it in a healthy and balanced spiritual perspective in which God and love and connection and spiritual growth is really at the center of it. Another one I would highly recommend is Aaron Abke. He actually talks about law of attraction and shows how the purpose of the law of attraction is to discover through trial and error that ultimately the only thing that can satisfy us is God. Moving on to the next question. Andrew Riley says, "Hello, Melissa. I have a question about A Course in Miracles. I know you have read it and you like it, sometimes quoting it. Correct me if I'm wrong. You believe in an individual soul that carries on in the afterlife as an individual. In A Course in Miracles, it seems that the idea of the afterlife described is one of merging with God and leaving behind individuality in order to fully become God once again. Can you please share your thoughts on this and what you think about A Course in Miracles' afterlife description?" So yes and yes, I do believe that we are individual souls, or spirits would probably be a better word, that carry on into the afterlife. And I also do believe that we are each on a journey of growth and development back towards God, and that we will fully unite with God again eventually. We came from God. We are on a journey of discovery and experience and awakening to our true nature on our way back to our source. People have a tendency to get hung up on individuality, and that's understandable. Nobody wants to lose their identity. And of course, I can't pretend to know everything that's going to happen once we're all purified enough to be fully merged with God. But I can tell you my own experience of being in the light at this level of spiritual development, and the experience of many others who have been in the light. You don't lose yourself. You can't lose yourself, even when you merge with the light or with God, because you are awareness. God is consciousness or awareness. I am that I am. And even science is now telling us that the universe is consciousness. So you can't lose consciousness. You can't lose awareness, because that's what your existence is. To lose yourself, you would have to be annihilated. And like I said before, I don't think that that's possible, because that means, metaphysically speaking, that part of God would have to be annihilated, and God is eternal and immutable. But to not exist anymore would be the only way for you to not be aware of yourself, because your existence is consciousness. So people get the wrong idea, because in this life we identify with our egos, not with our true nature as consciousness or awareness. And people think that if they lose their ego, or all the things that they are entangled with and identified with here, that they're going to lose themselves. And that's scary. I get it. But your ego is not you. And in fact, the whole purpose of this life is to learn to voluntarily rise above the ego. Those are all the things restricting us and boxing us in and causing us to suffer. And they are valuable experiences to have, and they do impact us on the being level. We may not take the ego identification with us, but we do take everything that we learned through the experience of having an ego. We take absolutely everything with us that is us in the truest sense. So all the love, all the experience, all the wisdom we've gained, the relationships, the bonds that we have forged here. It would be a really boring universe if we went to the trouble of coming here and having all of these experiences just to lose all of it when we merge with God in the end. No, on the contrary, I think that we bring all of our uniqueness back to God, and we get to share in the richness of each other's experience. Most people who have had a near-death experience describe being in the light as a combination of oneness and personal awareness. And you can sort of choose how intense you want the experience of oneness to be. So when you're in the light, and I can tell you this from personal experience, it is absolute bliss. You gain awareness because you gain connectedness with everyone and everything else. You don't lose anything. When you want the experience to be over, or if the experience is over spontaneously, you contract back into your personal identity. I experienced it as if I was shrinking back into my head, like a balloon losing air. So I was losing consciousness when I came back to myself, not losing it when I expanded to join with the light. In that state, I was still me. I was experiencing everything from the point of view of being me. Another thing to think about is that from a metaphysical perspective, time is an illusion. So according to quantum mechanics, everything is happening now. So our experience of growing as spiritual beings and one day merging back with God, this is how we see things from the illusion of time here in the physical world. And we choose to go through that process for the valuable learning that comes with cause and effect. But in reality, we are already one with God. We are one with God, and we are becoming one with God at the same time. We are eternally knowing God. We are eternally one with God and learning what it means to be one with God at the same time from a metaphysical perspective. And we see this in the name of God revealed in Exodus, I am that I am. God is knowing himself through us as we each come to know him. He is, or he exists eternally, and we are or exist eternally in him and are eternally experiencing ourselves in relation to him. So you are one with God now, and you are still you, so you will always be who you are. Anyway, I really got off on a tangent with that one. So it's not really a question of whether we exist as individuals or whether we will merge with God. They are both eternally true. They both exist now. We are just choosing to go through that awakening process of having that experience of discovering our oneness with God, which is so beautiful. All right, that's all I've got for you guys today. I have to go get tires on my car now. Thank you so much for watching. Be loved, be happy, be at peace, and I will see you next time.